We've had a look at some diagrams, and we can now ask ourselves, is there only one way to structure this? No, there isn't. And our dear friend here is trying to help us understand that internationally there are at least 3 clear divisions, 3 different ways. Of course there are more, you could make different variants of those, but just in general terms there's at least 3 different methods. So let's have a look at those. Does that mean that we have to choose one? No. Quite often on a project you may choose the advantages of one to track one part of what it is you're doing, and the advantages of another method for another period, another section of the project, and then you bring them together. So let's have a look at what they are. Here I'm just choosing an image for something that's very physically large, and this would involve multiple disciplines all working at the same time. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, but otherwise they're all working at the same time. For us to break this down, we would probably use a generalized method. What are those logical breakdowns of the final task? In other words, we are decomposing it. That's the key word. Next project, let's say, and I'm only choosing buildings here because they're large and we can see them clearly. Let's imagine that we're working on a project and we've got to install and build one set of facilities, some part of the factory, and it's only once that is completely finished that the client says, okay, now you can start the next one. So we have to work sequentially from one to the other. As soon as we introduce some kind of sequence, we're talking about a phase system. Okay. Last one. What happens if things are working over the top of each other, a lot of tasks in parallel, but we have to make sure that each one is producing what it is meant to before we trigger the next one. This is generally referred to as a deliverables approach. So are we creating what we want before we start the next one? We could say, well, that's similar to a phase system because it's looking at time. Yes, it is, but as we're about to see, phase just means the activity. A deliverables one means kind of closing one out before we start. Now, if we're looking for details about such things, you could go to your favorite book, which may well be The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And if you've read the book, there's some scope of work issues done on the last few pages. That's a very hungry caterpillar. But for most of us, I'm going to propose this is probably where we're going to find more about these 3 different systems. Decomposition. What does that mean? If we take this approach, we're working on the kind of project where just a logical, methodical breakdown and a strong rationale will drive it. Generally, we're asking questions such as, okay, what would be the logical subsections, or who are involved? Quite often, as a good starting point, we can break a project out by the different disciplines of people. What does that mean? Let's bring our large project example for this weekend, our James Webb Space Telescope. So we can see here the team reading from left to right at level 2 are saying, well, we'll break it out according to what has to be done by engineering, and then the materials science crew, and then we'll have the optical team, and then we'll have the propulsion team. So we can see they're trying to track all the tasks that are done by the disciplines. Okay, so they're using a decomposition method. A different kind of project is one where we have a sequence involved, and as soon as we have a sequence, the questions change. When we're asking, when do these tasks need to be done? What needs to be done before them to provide the information? What needs to be done after them? This tends to use project milestones, so those significant moments in time, as major headings. So let's bring an example in. This time, rather than use the big complicated project, let's bring it down to something smaller, such as that mandible insert. Here the team are saying, well, first thing we need is to somehow gather all the anatomical data. Only once we've done that can we move over into the concept engineering and design. Then we'll come over into making some prototypes. Then we'll do some installation sequences to get the crew up, the surgical team up to speed, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do that. So we can see they are now trying to track it just by the sequence, a phase method. Last one, deliverables. This is when we're speaking about something that we need to produce. What are the outcomes, and how does each little section, the outcome of that, inform the next one? So this is less popular, but it's worth us keeping in our mind. We're asking a different set of questions. What needs to be fully produced first? What information is needed? And down it goes. So if we use our space telescope, because we need the complexity in this example, the crew may say, well, the first thing we need is to get project accreditation certification, and there are all the tasks associated with that. It's only once we have that we can do the next one, and that's the full digital simulation. And once we get approval for that, then we can go to the full optical design. And so only once we've got handover, we can, so we can see, yeah, it's based across time, so there's a sequence there, but this is driven by outcome, not just by when they start. How? How would we know which one to use and when? Well, you're not meant to know. This is normally a decision that's based across an entire team, and as an engineer, you would be contributing to the aspects around engineering. As long as you're aware that there are a few different methods and that you may well choose to use a hybrid approach, a little bit of one and a little bit of the other, you're just kind of driving wherever their advantages are. That's what we need to know at this stage. Okay? How else are these things useful to us? Sell it to me. Okay. Generally, if we can generate a work breakdown structure for a problem that you have, which may be a course that you're doing or an assessment, or you're doing some work outside entrepreneurially, it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of scoping it. Once you can get your mind around this, it's a kind of an investment with a large amount of returns. So a little bit of work now has this downstream effect. It's a way of saving a lot of time, saving a lot of money, saving a lot of duress. So let's look at some examples about how they work. Sometimes you're working on a project and we know more about the top level than we know about the bottom levels. So an example may be a client says to you, well, here's your budget, you've got $500,000 now, come back to us with how you're going to break that down. So now we're working from the top level and we're drilling down. Let's say this example, you and I, this is the 24th project that we've worked on together, so we'll call it 24.0. So level 1, 24. Notice when we start to break out the level 2 sections, we're using a subsection, the same as we would see in a formal document where we've got subheadings. Same numbering system. So now it's 24.1, 24.2 for the next section, 24.3. So as we come down to level 3, we can see they are subsections. So we've got 24.2.1, 24.2.2, 24, you got it. So we've just got this fairly logical numerical sequence, but it's being driven from the top down. We're drilling down until we get to that stage where we don't need to track it anymore. So what? Who cares? The benefit of this is how you assign work to people. If you've been given a task and you have the opportunity to outsource it, you can now break it down. And as you get to those stages, you can make a decision. Do I just outsource some of those level 3s to them, or do they give them the responsibility of all of that level 2? It's also how you can estimate how far through the project you are. You can ask all the people involved in the various sections to estimate their percentage complete, and then you can total them up and give the client an understanding of where you are on the timeline. It's also where we start to inform things such as timesheets, invoices, estimates, anything that's coming in and out of the project team. You can now assign it one of these numbers and we know where the effort is being applied. That's how this little number will be referenced by all other sections of the PMP outside of the charter. Okay. A typical work package, scope of work, that may come from an engineer such as yourself, you may give this to me. Now notice the number that's highlighted there. If we go back one slide, notice the number that's indicated by the arrow. This is where it's coming from. So you may say to me, Warren, I need you to go and work on 24.2.2. Now, everything I generate has that code on it, and you know the work that I'm doing. You don't even have to ask. Now, you may choose to delegate that to me and say, Warren, go off and figure out the subtasks and how many hours and dollars you need. Or you could go back the other way and say, here's your budget, Warren. You go figure out how you're going to do that and come back to me. So we can see the power of this little number now. It's containing what I'm doing, so I'm not distracted and I'm not duplicating somebody else's effort. I'm in the zone. You can also use a WBS from the bottom to the top. So assuming that we've already made one of these diagrams and we've got it fairly well mapped out, if the client then says, we don't know how much this is going to cost to do this project, whatever it is, can you tell us, rather than them tell you what the money of the budget is, they say, can you come back to us, give us an estimate. Your team whips up a quick work breakdown structure and they begin to estimate all of those individual tasks and they total them up and we can go back with an estimate. This is how much it's going to cost. Okay. So we're working from known aspects, these little low-level details, up to an unknown. Okay. So this is a bottom-up process. This will be a theme. You'll notice this, we'll encounter this through quite a few sections of the project management plan and all the way through this course. It's a process of breaking down or comprehending the internal components, assigning particular attributes or characteristics to them, and then totaling them up and say, okay, how are we going to manage the overall system? Between you and I, these codes, you'll encounter them in professional practice and they flow out into most areas. Invoices from you to a client should have them. Invoices given to you from people who are working for you should have them. If they don't have them, don't pay them, because they may not be working on your project. Your timesheets, scopes of works, project review and project review meetings will be driven around these numbers. Engineering calculations. Sometimes you'll see WBS codes on drawings. I'd hesitate there because sometimes a drawing is used across multiple projects, so yeah, be careful with that one. You'll certainly see it in things like technical specifications, in the schedules, which we'll encounter in a few other weeks of this course together. Estimates, you can see that one little code is going all the way down. It'll appear in the storeroom as much as it appears in the boardroom. Okay. Super useful knowledge. Being aware of how to create one, how to use one is a life skill. You can generate one of these super quick and get your head into low level and high levels at the same time. So it's a great process for managing your time. It's a good boost for your professionalism. All right. How do we know if we've done one and we've started in, but it's not working well? Can this WBS help us? Yeah. So we've already seen some of the signs that we can use by this stage. So if we just reference some of the other sections we've been speaking about up until now in this course, is the scope starting to creep? I.e., are we starting to do things that are not tracked? Is it different to what we said we were going to do in the charter right back at the beginning? Is the WBS incomplete? Have we forgotten some sections? If so, go back and update it. Was the client information inaccurate? And yes, that can happen. So we go back and test that if we get some updated information reflected in our WBS and bump ourselves back on track. If the meetings are not regular and driven by the WBS, they become a chat fest. So the WBS, you can call people in just for that meeting. It's also a way to test if our KPIs, we encountered them previously, if they're starting to slip. What do? Make sure that we use a WBS as a structure to most of our engineering meetings. All activities are tracked against a WBS code. If people are working on something that's not in a WBS code, we ask the question, is that essential? Why isn't it in the code? If it's not essential, not on your project. Time to get a little bit brutal there to get control of it. We'll track our requirements. We encountered them previously. We're going to track them in something called a traceability matrix. Hang in there, a couple of videos time. Any variation, any decision made by a client or a sponsor or a major stakeholder that increases or decreases their scope, i.e. their level 3, level 4, level 5, record that in there. In other words, we're that's what a PMP is. This is our project management plan. What happens when things start to get out of control? Okay, in our next video, we're going to say, all right, that seems to make sense. What are some of these other terms that we hear in professional practice that are driven by a WBS? Let's get across some of them.